So on behalf of the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft, together with the Austrian Council for Research, I'd like to welcome you along to an open invitation in science. I know most of the people are here from Austria and Vienna, but we do have some friends and guests from abroad who might not know our beautiful city of Vienna. And I can just apologize for the weather. If we'd have started yesterday, we would have had 22 degrees. But the forecast for tomorrow, while you're actually working and learning, is not too good. But I think the weather will get better at the end of the session tomorrow for you. So enjoy our city if you're here over the weekend, and welcome to Vienna. Vienna is a city of science. It has been in the past, it is right now, in fact, in life science, and there really is nothing like it worldwide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about LOIS, which is the Lab for Open Innovation in Science. It's a training program, in fact, which is for scientists where they learn open innovation methods and use these methods in everyday research. And the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft, they've been doing this for over a year, and tomorrow actually marks a milestone in their history. It begins tomorrow with a total of 13 modules, which are going to be in place over the next 12 months or so, and the first one begins tomorrow. Here's a rundown for our evening and how the evening will look for you. Soon I'll introduce our two hosts for the evening. Then we've got a special guest to speak, and we will be having a panel discussion as well too. The subject will be the capacity to change what is needed to foster innovation-based growth through research. And then after the panel discussion, we'd like you to stay with us and join us while we have some hospitality, something to eat, something to drink, and of course representatives of the organizations and the panel guests will be here to talk to you, probably one-to-one, and as they say in Austria, unter vier Augen. But first, I'd like to bring on stage the general manager of the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft, the initiator of the project Open Innovation in Science. Please welcome Claudia Lingner. Claudia.
Stuart, thank you very much for this kind invitation. The Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft is an incubator for innovative research in science. We operate 18 research institutes with about 600 employees addressing socially relevant research questions. It is our aim to foster the transition of top-level research into society and relevant research questions. We are convinced that innovation are the result of consequent interdisciplinarity, strong partnerships, and targeted user innovation. Briefly, innovations need an open culture. We are keen to provide the necessary incentives for researchers to engage in an open ecosystem for knowledge production and dissemination. Thus, in 2014, the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft has initiated the pilot project Open Innovation in Science. The project is funded by the Austrian National Foundation for Research, Technology and Development. International support are provided by a renowned advisory board. The members, which included representatives from the HWO, Harvard Medical School and the Max Planck Society. I would like to thank wholeheartedly Eva Guinan, representative for the advisory board, for the invaluable advice and tremendous support. Eva, thanks for being here. Open innovation in science rests on common principles, such as sharing, collaboration, transparency, and cooperation. Quality improvement and enhancement of positive societal impact. The aim of this project is twofold. First, to demonstrate how to enrich science by opening up the research process, bringing new knowledge from outside to the research. And second, to train scientists, as you've heard from Stuart, on how to apply methods and principles of open innovation and open science along the entire research process. In April 2015, the crowdsourcing initiative TELUS was opening by us and has been initiated, for which patients, families, and professionals were invited to suggest new research topics in the field of mental health. The second pillar of our pilot project, Open Innovation in Science, is LOIS, the Lab for Open Innovation in Science. LOIS is a unique program to train scientists in open innovation methods and principles and give them methods to hand to apply the research process. The program is the first of this kind and starts tomorrow, as you've heard. The design of LOIS is based on the needs of researchers, the current state of research on open innovation and open science, as well as the results from the crowdsourcing initiative. LOIS offers 20 selected researchers and scientists an exclusive professional development program through in-class workshops, experimentation, and practical implementation. The practical implementation of methods learned is a key component. The faculty consists of leading open innovation and open science experts. LOIS shall contribute to an uptake of open innovation and open science among researchers to enhance the connection between science and society and to provide better and quicker solutions for societal challenges. We would like to pave new ways without destroying what is working well. Our emphasis lays on developing new ways of participation in knowledge production and a gentle transition into new forms of cooperation and dissemination. So let us build an ecosystem for research and innovation that provide enough space and time for exploration and experimentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. Claudia Lindger, of course, the general manager of the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft. You don't really need me here for this particular announcement, do you? But I can tell you next, a lady who also, like me now, lives in Vienna, and we both had the horrors of gridlock in this wonderful city of getting here tonight, but she did make it, and so did I too. So please welcome on stage right now the board member for the Austrian Council for Research and Technology Development, chairman of ERA Council Austria, Professor Helga Nowotny. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome from my side on behalf of the Austrian Council, Rat für Forschung und Technologieentwicklung, as it is known here in Austria. The Austrian Council follows very closely the developments in open science, in open innovation. It follows and supports the strategy that the Austrian government is preparing for open innovation, including a roadmap, most likely to be presented in the summer. And therefore, the Austrian Council takes great pride and pleasure in co-organizing and co-hosting this meeting. Let me add from my side that the event tonight is a very important one as part of a much wider worldwide movement. It's a movement that takes very different forms. And for instance, at EU level, Commissioner Moedas has launched the strategy of the 3 O's: open science, open innovation, openness to the world. And in various parts of the world, there are different ways of engaging with citizens, opening science researchers, inviting lay people to participate even in their research projects. If you try to survey what is happening, one possible typology would be to look at what has been done so far. And of course, the movement is not entirely new. If you go back to the beginning of modern science, you had the amateurs, which literally translates as lovers of science. And this amateur movement was part of the success of science over the ages. Now, in the 21st century, we have reached a level of education, in the Western world at least, that has never been as high as before, and we hope that this will become a global phenomenon. And so involving citizens has also taken other forms. So one way of giving you a feeling for the different forms that this may take, you can think of it as those technology-savvy people who work with their computers. Let's call them the calculators. And the most well-known achievement was the folded experiment, which is well known, of involving lay people helping to calculate and to visualize a particular folding structure of a particular protein. Then there are those who call themselves the makers. And in Vienna this weekend, there will be, I think, one of the first makers' fairs in Vienna. People who do it themselves and who participate by doing this. Then there are those who observe, participate, monitor. In the environmental field, this has become a very strong way of engaging because there's a lot to be done about the environment. But also, and this is a long tradition, astronomy has always relied on people, lay people, who have followed what happens in astronomy. Then there are those who analyze the crowdsourcing. And I come to this particular evening and to what Claudia has told us, what will happen here. I think you have invented something new, something that does not exist in this form elsewhere. And I would call it the research problem finders and the research problem solvers. There is a gap that is noticed by many of us who work in science, realizing that there is a real-world problem outside. But the way how science can tackle it means you have to be able to translate it into scientific terms. You have to transform the real-world problem into something that is tractable with scientific methods, with scientific concepts and means. And I think by opening up this research problem definition, you have opened a new doorway to how this can be done, bringing in parts of the problem as they are experienced by people in the real world, families of people with mental health problems, etc., and translating it into scientific terms. But having defined a research problem is very important, but it can be only the beginning, and the beginning of a road that leads towards problem solving. So I think you are on a very good track, and I want to congratulate you and wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Professor Helga Nowotny. And now it's time for our keynote speech from our special guest, Open Innovation, Value in the Process as well as the Solutions. She's from Harvard University in the United States, Harvard Medical School. She's been the senior investigator for clinical trials in human stem cell transplantation. She and her team have discovered a radiation mitigation strategy that may be suitable for use after exposures at, for example, at Fukushima and Chernobyl. And she's also the director of the Harvard Catalytic Reactor Program. She's here tonight, not too jet-lagged, for the second time in 6 months, I think. Please welcome Professor Eva Guinan.
Thank you. All right, I am a little jet lagged, so I'm going to put a watch down here so I don't keep you in your seats for too long. But thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. And these are just such incredibly interesting topics to discuss. And more than that, this is a really very singular endeavor, what's going on here in Austria. And I would like, if nothing else, to impress upon people that a project of this magnitude, a project that is this multidimensional, and that is as considered in its conception and execution, is so rare as to be singular. And to be part of that, I think, is extraordinarily exciting and an amazing opportunity to try to redefine some of our academic scientific enterprise and our practical scientific enterprise. And those go really hand in hand, perhaps not as seamlessly as we would like, but this will move things in that direction. So I would like today to actually address some of the topics that Professor Nowotny has actually already put on the table. And they are, in a sense, some of the very practical aspects of open innovation in biomedicine, if you will, which is really the area in which I operate, but in the scientific enterprise. Because it doesn't so much help us if we consider a new way of working to be a set of one-offs, if they are just opportunities to see if doing something differently can create a single point solution or a single point opportunity or single application. It really changes the field only if we think about this as a series of steps that renovates the entire enterprise. And to do that, and to end up with the ultimate goal, which really is a social good in terms of the health of populations and individuals, means that we also have to consider how these new opportunities and new means of approach to old problems can be fitted seamlessly where possible or in more revolutionary ways into the structures in which we currently work, because otherwise nothing's going to really move. I mean, if we just sort of create opposition, we don't get anywhere. We need to actually understand how to move in some common way so that we move more efficiently and more productively. And I would like to just sort of go through 3 or 4 of those areas. So one is really understanding purpose. It's one thing to say that you want to do open innovation. And to do that, you can create a crowdsourcing exercise. That's the easiest, or a competition. And you can solve some very sexy problem in an attractive way, and probably with a likelihood of 90%. I can guarantee you that if you do a computational type competition, you will end up with an improvement on where you started from, and it will be substantive, and it will be of interest, and it will be published, and people will get up and talk about it. But it doesn't necessarily change anything, because it only changes it if there was a purpose in doing it. Was there an important problem that was being addressed? Is that problem important to a community? And if so, what community? So what's the purpose of doing it? Well, you can have the purpose of proving to a community that may not be very interested in the use of competitions and open innovation technique, that a competition can be successfully carried out in their own sort of home stomping grounds, and that the solution that's provided is one that's more efficient, more detailed, more productive than the solution that existed on the basis of pre-existing means of doing work. That can be your purpose, and if that's your purpose, you know what that is, and you set about to try to answer that question, and then to publicize that result. The other sort of purpose is to say that there's a problem which has a certain endpoint, and what you want to do is actually get something implemented in a process that in the end actually has value for a larger community. And that takes a lot more planning and a really deliberate stepwise approach to what you're going to do. So the first is really, what's your purpose, and how are you going to execute that? And do you have a plan for what the product of your innovation efforts is going to be? The second was actually so eloquently spoken about, the second issue that I wanted to address in the previous comments, that I don't really need to return to it much, and so that's actually a bonus. And that is the issue of how you formulate a question. And a lot has been written about that, a lot is still being learned about that, but it has become increasingly clear that scientists don't formulate their questions particularly well. And I find that somewhat ironic because we tend to think of ourselves as people who work on the basis of hypothesis. We did an event at Harvard Medical School where we actually asked people, in the interests of forming interdisciplinary teams, to come forward with a question that they cared about, then to explain why it was important, and then to explain why the solution would be important to the conduct of their research. And to do that in 300 words. And then we were going to use that for a more complicated process that's not really relevant here. But what I can tell you is that in a very good academic community, filled with very good people doing really exceptional science, out of 400 people, there were approximately 50 who could articulate a question in a way that someone else could understand it. There were 350 people who actually wrote and told us what their idea was. Now maybe that's not so surprising because these are people who think highly of their own ideas and may not think that others are going to understand their questions. But the problem was that they couldn't convey the question in a way that would allow a person of a different discipline, or even their same discipline, to actually actively participate in the solution of the question. And it took us an extra month of work to return to people their questions and say, great hypothesis, what's your question? And you still haven't managed to explain why it's important. Actually, I can't even tell why it's important to you. So start over, 300 words, and what is your question, and why is it important, and why is it going to make a difference to you? So we have a long way to go, not just in the words of communication, but in conceptualizing what it is you actually mean when you're asking someone a question. And in the open innovation setting, in general, the purpose is to allow somebody else to participate in the solution, not to put forth a novel idea. But it is to actually ask in a way that indicates that you're receptive, that you're looking for new information, that you're looking for new insights, and that you've actually gone to the trouble of communicating that in a way which actively invites it. And not simply as you just heard, in order to allow someone to understand it, but also to actually invite participation. And people who are experts in innovation theory, some of them who have started commercial enterprises, like the people who started Innocentive, which grew out of Eli Lilly as an innovation engine, have developed massive expertise in doing this and have brilliant examples, one after another, of how the way that you structure your question actually completely predicts the people who will participate in the solution process. And that's not really something that we think about a lot. In general, we phrase our question to a knowledgeable community of people who know that they're being targeted and who understand the language and understand exactly what the construct of the exercise is. What we don't do is think about, how would I ask this question so that people who have this condition or who are impeded by this procedural problem will be interested enough in this question that they will take time out of their day to participate in proffering a solution. That's a social exercise, and it is a technical exercise, and it's something in which we actually don't have a lot of expertise and we don't think about it a lot. The next thing I wanted to talk about a little bit in terms of process, because these I think are procedural things that help us in our everyday work, but they are process issues that are integral to actually moving the field of open innovation from something which is less of an art form and more of an everyday activity, if you will, is to also think about how you manage that process. And that's part of what you're going to see, I think, tomorrow and over the course of these modules, be something that there's a real effort to structure and educate about, which is impressive. And that is, think about this. You choose to work with the people, you choose to fund people who know to some extent, exactly what they're about. They've chosen their collaborators. They've worked with them for a really long time. They've assembled a team. It's narrow in general in the area that it is addressing. It's narrow in scope, it's narrow in expertise, and it's relatively well integrated. And there's a real plan for how the idea is going to get promoted and so forth over some sort of short term. Now I'm going to sit here and say, you know, I would really like to look at schizophrenia. And what I'm really hoping to do is to end up with a team that's got, you know, a public health person and a psychiatrist and a psychologist. I'm really thinking architecture, thinking about housing would be really interesting to do this. And maybe what we also need is somebody who thinks about color theory and about the environment. And then we're going to tackle this interesting issue about whether we could create therapeutic housing for people with schizophrenia. I don't know, something, whatever. Okay, how's that project going to get anything done in the next year? Those people don't even have each other's phone numbers. They don't speak each other's languages. They've got different people who fund them. They work for different organizations, all of whom have their own structures for monitoring work and for funding work, and for supporting people and for allocating space and for hiring and all of that. And you're going to ask them to produce something in a year. How's that going to happen? There's very little in this space that actually thinks about how you manage open innovation. In a way, people have been refractory to that. Well, it's open. I don't have to manage. That's the whole thing. Now I'm working in a place where no one's going to tell me what to do. It's not that we're not going to tell you what to do. It's that you're working to do it in a way that's different. But you still have to get something done. So how do you take now what's a different social construct and a set of different presumptions as you enter into your working contract with people and manage it in a way which is productive? It's a whole other set of things we need to address in order to make this form of work productive. And that doesn't happen in isolation, because whatever program management, whatever structure is created has to work at the very least in parallel and hopefully in a more integrated way with the other structures around it that are using other approaches to the problem. And lastly, and this is a word that you also happily just heard, and that's really dissemination. So if this is not sort of academic or scientific high-fiving and trickery, what it needs to be is something that solves real problems. And the reason that we turn to open innovation is because there are difficult problems and pressing problems that haven't yielded to other ways of addressing them, or that haven't been efficient enough or productive enough. So we've turned to something new, and we come up with a new product to which there is intrinsic resistance in the system because it doesn't arise from the conventional system. So how's it getting tested? How's it getting implemented? If you have a contest and there's a solution and no one uses your solution, then other than proving that you could do it, it wasn't really very worthwhile, unless it was a teaching exercise, unless it was a proof of concept. But in the end, we're trying to solve real problems that have value to society. And to do that, ultimately, each of these exercises, each of you in your own labs and in your own organizations and in your own interaction with the concepts of open innovation, has to grapple with the question of how those innovation products are going to find a home in a somewhat larger universe than in the one which created it. And so I think dissemination is yet another challenge if this is to be a value-rich approach to problems and a value-rich scientific solution process. Because it's not always readily available when it comes from the outside and when it comes from a different formulation, how it's going to get integrated and how it's going to be supported, move forward, and be advanced by others who may be using other forms of approach to problems and applications. So those are, I think, important touch points about process, and tomorrow I'm going to be talking a little bit about, in a much more practical way, you know, how these things can be addressed, give some examples of how they have gone forward. But again, examples aren't the same as sort of, I think, stepping back and thinking about how all of this work integrates. And as I understand what's going on with the movement from CRIS to LOIS and planned movements beyond that. That's why this effort that you're listening to, that you're participating in, and that you're observing will be so important, because it's an opportunity to really understand and try to create and to understand a more integrated whole. So hopefully we'll see more about that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Eva Guinan from Harvard Medical School in the USA. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to our panel discussion. You've already heard from Professor Helga Nowotny from the Austrian Council for Research and Technology Development. Helga, by the way, will chair the discussion along with our special guest, Eva Guinan. And the other panel members I will introduce to you right now, they are men. First of all, Werner Lanthaler is unable to make it tonight, but in his place, we have a man who's Executive Vice President, Head of Immunology at Evotec, responsible for a growing portfolio of research and development products in the areas of inflammation and immuno-oncology for Evotec, with the focus on building high-value performance-based drug discovery alliances with academia and pharma. He was also the co-founder and chief scientific officer at Tegenero, a German biotech company where he headed efforts to develop first-in-the-class immune-omodulatory monoclonal antibody. And I think I need a science degree to pronounce that as well, too. And my favorite quote from him is what he found from an employee from Amazon who said, and I quote, and he quotes, "We sold more books today that didn't sell at all yesterday than we sold today as all the books that did sell yesterday." So that's something to maybe think about and talk about after the panel discussion. Please welcome Dr. Thomas Hanke, who'll be coming up on stage in a moment. And now, last but not least, our final panel guest is a director at the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute for Archaeological Prospectation and Virtual Archaeology. His speciality involves bringing scientific and technical methods to the efforts to clarify archaeological questions. He's worked in the area around Stonehenge. He and his team performed scans below the ground and discovered numerous new monuments, among them the new henge, which was actually made of wood. All of these discoveries were made without the turn of a spade. And he will take part. He is the Scientist of the Year, by the way, and he will take part in the lab for open innovation for science starting tomorrow. So actually, he'll be going back to his student days tomorrow. We welcome Professor Wolfgang Neubauer. And can I now introduce the panel, who will be talked to by Helga, and she will be the chair for our panel this evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Stuart, for introducing all of us, and especially for keeping such exemplary way, keeping the time. This gives us some 45 minutes, 50 minutes for a very intense discussion, I hope, very enlightening discussion after the wonderful keynote speak that we just heard. And I would like to start with you, Thomas Hanke. You heard about one point I would take up from Eva, namely how to manage the open innovation process. Now, coming from industry, you are used to management. It's part of your day-to-day activities. And managing for you also means building partnerships of various kinds with academia. But what would be your response, how to manage open innovation in the kind of environment in which you work?
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe I should say a few words about Evotec as a company. We are an integrated biotechnology company. We're about 1,000 people working on different sites across Europe and the US. And over the years, since the mid-90s when Evotec was built, we've developed 250 partnerships, both with academia but also with pharma in the space of early stage drug development. So as a company who has had a varied history, from a technology focus to a focus on development of therapeutics, which at the end of the day have the goal of improving patients' lives and thus society. We are an organization which basically is facing these management topics of how to manage a relation basically every day. And since evotec is, if you will, at the center of drug development in the sense that we are working very closely together with academic scientists to take up a certain knowledge on a biology, on a certain disease, on a certain idea of how to treat somebody on the one hand side, what we're trying to do is we're trying to enable these kind of thoughts through applying the technological platform that evotec can offer. And once the product have advanced, we're going to collaborate with Big Pharma. We're going to give them this.
Now it's obvious that pharmaceutical industry everywhere has the highest percentage of resources devoted to research.
Exactly.
You're very much dependent on working closely together with the academic community. But where do you see in your world a place for open innovation? And in particular, as the pharma industry also is very conscious of the importance of intellectual property rights.
Absolutely.
There are different areas in which this is not as important as it is taken in the pharmaceutical industry. So I would like you to, open up this black box a bit and let us give us a feeling for the kind of problems that you see or the ways how you try to move in the direction of open innovation, if it makes any sense at all for the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, I think it does, and I think it does at two different ends. I'll come to that in a second. But and a lot of it, and there's a centerpiece which pharma tends to exclude in terms of open innovation. That's all related to when you can generate a patent, which is sort of the trading currency of how you can basically sell science within a commercially competitive environment. But I think there's two areas where I think open innovation has a space. And one is, I think, very early in the drug discovery process. And this is an important one because it's the longest one. I think once you're developing a drug and you're doing preclinical, clinical trials, stage 1 to 3, there's a certain, I would say, time framework. And it's important because there's a lot of time pressure on pharma, and on the one hand side, from a commercial end, but also to make novel medicines available to the patients. If you go back to open innovation.
In fact, if I may just interrupt you for a second, there has been research done on the way how too early patenting is negative for drug discovery, because then it's like putting up a sign, this is an area that is already occupied, keep off it. So this is just something that
it's an excellent point. It's an art by itself to find the right time to patent. In drug development, it's usually at a stage where you can start clinical development sometime in the close future, because patents have only a runtime of 20 years, 5 years of extension possible, so you want to time it very carefully. But before that, I think there's a space for open innovation that is in the drug discovery, and which also can take 2 years, but it can take 20 years until a sort of a medical hypothesis has matured to a stage where you say, now we're going to develop a drug on a certain for a certain disease on a certain pathway. And on this end, I think this is done to 98% in academic environment. And I think in this context, there is room for open innovation. And I think some of the universities, also in Europe, some of the leading universities have taken this step. I've been in Oxford, working together with Oxford University, where, for example, in the Department of Organic Chemistry, there's a studentship formed where
so
different commercial partners.
Benefit for both.
It's for mutual partners, sides, and it's supported by certain pharma and biotech companies, where there's student grants being given, and that's completely open access. All results during this PhD generating phase will be shared, and it will be across medical, biological, and then purely chemical applications. So I think very early in the space, there is a room for it.
Can I just ask Eva to comment on this from your experience? How does this work out?
The IP question?
Yeah.
I mean, I think So IP
And
is
also, I mean, we all agree there is this very important phase before it comes to IP, and it's an open opportunity for mutual benefit for all. But how do you see this? Do you want to comment on what has just been said?
I can comment briefly on the IP issue, just to the extent that clearly this is an issue. I think a lot of times, honestly, for academics, which is quite different than pharma, it's a perceptual issue, because people have a tendency to believe that anything that they think about is somehow intellectual property, which it isn't. You have to be able to reduce it to practice, and the frequency with which someone in academics can reduce something to practice is pretty darn low. So I think the barrier, there's a perceptual barrier, and then there is a real barrier. What we find in doing these exercises is very interesting. There are people who really want to share, and clearly just decided that where those chips fall, they fall. And there are others who write to us and say, this is very interesting, and I have a really wonderful idea, and it's too bad. I mean, they literally write this. And it's too bad that you're never going to know about it, because it's my intellectual property, and I'm not sharing it. And I'm most struck in those interactions, of which there are multiple, that they felt a need to tell me that, rather than simply not participating. So there's clearly some friction around those issues. But I do think there is space for openness and sharing, and I don't think that we've come up with the best formats for doing that at all.
And there was another phase that you wanted to talk about.
Which is increasingly, there's growing perception that there can be a lot of the big pharmas can work together without being anti-competitive. And that is in clinical development of sharing best practices for clinical management. A lot of these late-stage clinical trials are extremely expensive. People are struggling with the same questions. Can you find the best biomarkers? How can you stratify patients so that they become responsive to the drugs which are being developed? And I think in this area, this is an area where I see that some of the pharmas have loosened up their little bit rigid policy towards data sharing, where you could say, sharing clinical operational best practices and some of the issues of how you can improve clinical trial efficacy is an area which I see some progress here. It's, for example, supported by the European IMI initiatives also on this particular project. So I think there are openings early stage in the drug development, later stage when you can already see where conversation takes place.
But the openness in terms of whom you include is different. In the first case, it's mainly people working at universities. Yeah. In the second case, it's other firms, and of course, once it becomes so expensive, you're also driven by the cost factor to come up with something. But let me just ask one more question before we turn to you. There has been this recent announcement that I'm sure you have read about, these certain 13 superheroes, as Stephen Friend calls them. These are people whose genomes have been sequenced, many whole genome sequences, who have been identified as resisting against all odds, against the diseases that, by everything we know, they should have. Now, this can only come about by sharing data. And we are seeing more and more of this pressure towards sharing data. Now, what does this mean for the way how you work? What does it mean for your daily, work and the purposes that you described? And then we come to you.
I think it's a very exciting development. But maybe I want to utter a word of caution that basically, even if you know the genomic structure of a person, I personally do believe you will have only a limited handle to predict at the end of the day susceptibility to basically have certain
we agree. There is no
and I think that's certainly not the case. But I think society strives in this direction. I think it's an area for sharing genomic footprinting, which really is prone also to have an open access to. So I think it's the right development.
You know, I think we were actually, interestingly, I was discussing this with some other people here tonight before this discussion. I think there are a couple of different there are a couple of different issues there, and I think one is that I think that sharing genomic data is a little bit deceptive in terms of our understanding of people's willingness to share data. Because if you're doing really high-level genomic work, you need massive N, otherwise you have absolutely nothing because of polymorphisms and you know, outbreeding, if you will. So, I mean, you can't do your work without actually sharing it. It's become clear that the work is meaningless unless it goes across really huge N. So it's either share or nothing, because no one is ever going to have those data sets. So in principle, I think there's an imperative for people to do it. And it's good that they do, and the formats and so on for doing that are becoming better. What I think is actually interesting, however, is that absolutely does not extend to other data sharing. This is something we're talking about. So I think more and more what we're seeing, and there was an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine. There have been several huge articles in the U.S. press, at least the New York Times. I suspect it's been the same here, about the fact that big data sets are being opened up, and yet people aren't really taking advantage of them. And I think trying to understand what the resistance to doing so across fields is I think actually really very interesting. I mean, from the little that I know, which would also be the public press about the kind of work that you do, I mean, there's a huge amount of technology and investment being put into generating very data-rich sets. And yet they're not actually mined by other people, even when they are made available, which is fabulously interesting. The NIH in the US had a huge effort over the past 2 years to open up, and did successfully open up, the data sets of virtually all research that they fund. And it's not being used. So why isn't it being used? And what's the refractoriness to using it? What are the impediments to using it? How much of that is infrastructure? How much of that is investigator resistance? It looks like a lot of it's investigator resistance. So we have work there to understand. We believe that would be a common good. Effort and money was put into making stuff available. It's being way underutilized. That's a problem we need to understand.
Well, I think there are two different approaches to this.
Yes.
One has to do with the necessity of curating interoperability of data, which very often it's neglected. You know, people
Absolutely.
are putting money into setting up an infrastructure, whatever its nature, and they tend to disregard the costs that come with maintenance, with repairing, with curating, with making it interoperability. You need certain standards, you have to refine the standards, you need to discuss with the community, etc. So a lot of this work goes into that, and we are not attuned to doing that. We think once the infrastructure is there, that's enough. I think that's one way of approaching it. And the other one, I think, has to do with a change of ethos. You know, when you said either you share or you do nothing, in high energy physics, if you think you share, or there's nothing outside, so it's the nature of the work.
Yeah.
And the question is really, are we moving towards this? And this is also my question to you. In archaeology, and the kind of archaeology that you have been pioneering also with other colleagues, where you rely so much on sensing and, you know, not taking the spade, as Stuart said, into your hand. How do you see this kind of development within your community?
Well, I would say one major problem is that the competitiveness of research is now also entering into humanities. Despite the fact that humanities always was something on a single brain. It was never the thing that we had teamwork humanities.
But there was always competition among single brains.
There was major competition also in archaeology. And
who found which fossil?
Yeah, and also it started with amateurs, as you have stated in your beginning keynote. The point, I guess, is really to take it up again with this keynote speech and say, what is the real challenge? What is the real question that we have, let's say, in archaeology? And really the main question is, how can we actually safeguard our archaeological heritage, which is buried in the ground and sometimes still standing, and how can we preserve this for the future generation, and how can we learn from these remains in a way that we see our history. I don't think that we really learn from history, so I'm very close to Sir Popper in this point, but if we have this challenge, and if we see that this destruction is multifold, so you all have been probably also shocked by the things that happened in Palmyra, but it's not only these very dramatic destructions, it's also the very slow destruction which comes through erosion, which comes through the climate change, which destroys, let's say, the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. They are heavily affected by destructive processes, and so on and so on. So we cannot cope with this problem if we use the conventional techniques in archaeology. And this was the major impact of the development of these techniques that we use still today, and it started in the end of the 1950s. And I guess it is a very good example because it has to combine different fields of research. And without sharing the questions, without sharing the primary problem, we would not be able to motivate, let's say, computer scientists or geophysicists or physicists or geologists to join into a team to get a solution for a major problem in the safeguarding and in the documentation of our buried heritage, which is the kind of book of history which is buried in the soil, which should be preserved or read in the right way. And this is a very important
apparently
point.
You started out by saying, competition is also coming to the humanities.
Yeah.
But apparently from what you say, you have been able to manage the competition somehow and get a team spirit.
Yeah.
Incentives have to be provided in any cooperation. Unless you have incentives, people will not cooperate. So how did this come about? I mean, you can also have competition between teams.
Yeah.
But how did you get to the point where I take it you are now?
So we started very early to develop methodologies and to do kind of contract work. So we were in very close cooperation with customers, which were asking for a product or for their specific product. So we actually had a kind of process which is now also part of open innovation as a new methodology. So we had this close contact to the people who needed solutions for specific problems. So where should we put our next excavation money into this field or in the other field? Or how can I find this and this in these fields because I'm looking for new irrigation systems. So where is the old pipes and blah, blah.
So having to solve very practical, logistical, day-to-day problems can become a kind of glue to hold together the team because you have to come up with practical solutions.
And also, of course, when you then go into the technical solutions, then you have to actually find also a language that these scientists from the other fields are understanding what you're actually talking about. And if you cannot explain, as you said, what the real problem is, you will not get them involved into the solution. And this is a very big thing. And now with the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute, which is a great thing, because it's based on partnerships, which is based on people paying into this research and therefore really showing their interest that there is a problem and that there should be a solution for it. And the best example that we had now in the last 6 years was that we could actually change the policy on cultural heritage in Norway. So all new projects in Norway are now first investigated by this non-invasive technology, whereas before it was digging, 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 like hell, for nothing and nothing at all. So this is a very big thing, that having large partnerships and having a lot of people bringing their brain into a major problem and going in this way also in a network situation into a kind of mission. To change policy from this point, this is actually the most important thing of what we do now, because if we can change the policy, then this will also be the guarantee for future funding into this specific type of research. And if you're going to find a nice medicamentation or a nice therapy, then this is also guaranteeing the money for the research, the basic research which comes into the future of your specific company or whatever it is. And I guess this is the main important thing. We have questions, we have challenges, and there is a lot of possibilities to answer this. And they are not only in ourselves or in a small group of very high-profile scientists, it's all out. And if we can get this all in, then we can manage this. And Stonehenge was mentioned before. It's a very good example. So you can imagine that they did not wait in Stonehenge to have some Austrians coming up and tell them what the new thing is to do. So there's a very competitive situation in Stonehenge. There was a lot of teams. And we managed now that the two largest projects of the last years joined together. So there's now a big bunch of scientists in Stonehenge working together. We have been the incubator in this field in Stonehenge. And how did it work? It did work because we shared our findings with the public.
Yeah.
We went
and
into
there's
media.
reciprocity in the
And
end.
this was actually invoking the interest of the
Yeah.
other scientists, and and now it worked.
Eva, you are also a teacher at Harvard, I suppose. What is the kind of message that you can convey to your students, preparing them for the world in which we would like to have more of this sharing, more incentives? How you and your colleagues, what can you tell your students, and how can you get them a bit closer towards what we were just talking about?
I think the issue of interdisciplinarity is a huge message for students. In a way, one that's difficult to convey, because when you're a student, you're still trying to learn your first discipline. So it becomes easy to become very focused, and in general, what you're being told is that narrowness of focus and sort of the absoluteness of achievement are what gets you somewhere, because it is competitive. So there's a lot of pressure on them not to be broad. There's a lot of pressure on them to be incredibly narrow and incredibly focused. And so I think in terms of teaching, one of the messages is to try to explain what the countervailing forces on that are, and that there's a lot of value in interdisciplinarity. So I think that's one message when I teach that I try to be very clear about. And then the other one is really actually about sort of purpose and clarity in your own life. And in a way, that is a very sort of global and sounds very soft. And, you know, you can have wonderful thoughts about what you want to do, but you still have to eat at the end of the day, and it would be nice to have a job contract. But to try to be mindful right from the beginning about how you want to orchestrate your, in this case, really academic or scientific life. I mean, do you see yourself as a team person? How do you understand yourself? And there's a course that we teach where I actually do a 2-hour lecture on trying to think about really recognizing how you operate in a group and trying to learn from that. I mean, if you are someone who is, you know, very rapid in your thought process, who do you want to partner with? If you're someone who really just can't stand it if someone is critiquing you, then, you know, how do you integrate that into where you work and think about what sort of discipline and what sort of place in that discipline you're going to have? Because I think we ignore that. And if you use that, you can sort of try to steer those people for whom more open methods work, likely to be productive there, and to try to explain to others if this is going to be part of your workplace, you may want to reconsider how you relate to others who are using this, even if you yourself choose not to. So those would be two pretty central messages.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try to bring in the public, you know, which you will be doing from tomorrow onwards. and Wolfgang will participate. We were wondering what was your motivation, so maybe we can come back to that. When I was professor at ETH Zurich, and we did a project on what we called imaginary lay people. We were interested in what were the ideas that scientists had about lay people. And this was very interesting because it was completely unrealistic, and it was an ideal type of the lay people. This was more on the environmental side, because you cannot do everything, and it differs. But I think bringing in the lay people, apart from conveying it to people who are fascinated by archaeology, or people who are interested in reading in the media, the section how to live a healthy life, etc. What is the idea about the public, the society, lay people with whom we want to engage? What is your experience of that? Whoever wants to start with the question, maybe Wolfgang. You actually meet people because people are fascinated by what you do. They want to learn. So you have this great advantage. And you can also, the problems you are researching are of course different from the problems in medicine or schizophrenia, etc. But nevertheless, let's talk a little bit about your imagination of lay people, and not just the ones you see or your colleagues' imagination.
So of course we have a very positive situation in archaeology, because whenever we are in the field, we are visible.
Of course.
So our research is visible.
It's great. People even, when there are these curtains or scaffolding, people try to peek in, what is happening.
Yeah. So we have a very open access to the people, because it's absolutely necessary to explain everybody who is coming along what we are doing and why we are doing this. Because we want to go on with the research, we want to go on fields of, and not hundreds, of thousands of landowners, and the more people that know about the importance of our work, the easier it gets to get all the permissions done. And it's really thousands. So let's say for Stonehenge it was not a big problem, it was 5 landowners, but the project in Carnuntum was already 280, and the first large project we did was 550, and the current largest case study we have in Austria is 3,500 landowners that we have to contact and that we have to get the permissions from.
And you managed to get them
we have
all on
therefore,
board? Or?
We therefore have also to look for different ways of dissemination and for the generation of awareness for the respective research that we do. And of course, the easiest is to give the people some, let's call it edutainment. So to have
I would
a
say
good story and
I would say you answer their
this.
curiosity. I would not call it entertainment. There are different ways of answering their curiosity. Sorry.
So it's really important to raise this awareness and to also think about other ways of dissemination. And that's the reason why our institute is using all different types of channels to disseminate this. So not only the media, the classical media, press, radio, TV, but also all the different types of social medias, different platforms that are installed to actually distribute this information. And what we did see, especially with the new findings in Stonehenge and Carnuntum, was that it is really exploding. It's exploding in a way which is really dramatic. And this was especially with YouTube. We put in a small clip of not even 5 minutes, without sound, without any explanation, of our new finding in Durrington Walls, a henge monument which had earlier structures. We had in 3 days 500,000 clicks on this YouTube clip, and it was just, we said, what the hell, how many people are really interested in what we do? And analyzing this also helps, of course, to plan future strategic means of dissemination. And this is a very important thing, because having a strategic dissemination plan also puts you into the need to say, well, we have to go out to the people and tell them what our findings are, and also what is the points why we are researching. What is the fascinating thing in what we do, and why do we want to do it, and what is it for? And
See, you could have done my 300-word.
yes,
Right, exactly.
I
And
guess
that's the
I
point.
He can do it. He can do it.
can, yes.
Now, the pharmaceutical industry obviously is also interested in letting the people know what they are doing, but they're also interested in selling their products. And so I turn to you, and how do you manage to get the message across? And there are, of course, also all kinds of reservations against the pharmaceutical industry overdoing it, trying to push products which are not really necessary, etc. So it's not such an open and hospitable audience that you're dealing with.
I think many of biomedical researchers, if you think about lay people, they often see them as potential patients. I mean, every person here is a potential patient.
Okay.
So in that sense, you say it's an inclusive attitude up front, right? Because it's basically what you base from a humanitarian perspective, but it's also who you need to address, because it's at the end of the day your customer, if you will, through certain intermediaries. So I would say initially there's probably a very inclusive attitude there. But then if you're a true researcher, and in the past I've also experienced many researchers to be less inclusive, because they think, and it's a matter of question communication, it's basically, I'm an expert and these are non-experts, and why should I bother trying to share the same language with these people? Which I think is certainly not the attitude. I think there's some changes. I think it's 10, 15 years ago it was more pronounced. But I think it's still a risk that you see, basically, that if you look at scientific journals, they are written usually for scientists. There's a lay press, and they often don't really crosstalk to each other very well. So I think there is this risk that biomedical researchers tend to go back into their expertness and try to basically stick among themselves, because they see themselves
and is there a change going on now?
I think
because
there's so
much
of the change
pressure coming
can be forced. I think it's a good thing from patient advocacy groups. Because right now with the new media, they place themselves sometimes in the middle between the drug developers and the patients, and they force the drug developers to think more like a patient would think. And the patients are so educated, they will come and ask all sorts of questions, so that the patients are less layman than they were before the internet had made it available to them. So I think there's a need basically to have a better communication from the patient to the drug developers. And I think it's happening, and it's forced onto them.
Is something happening to make this possible, and in that sense to be more open? Not just, there are the patient advocacy groups, there are the patient groups where relatives come. We even know of examples where they are raising money because these are rare diseases. They think that research is insufficient, etc. So all this is going on. But there the pressure comes from the side of the patients. What is the pressure that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, or response to pressure? What are you doing to open up?
I think the understanding that there are certain foundations being created by certain pharma companies who have the main goal to interact particularly with patient or through patient advocacy groups. I think at the end of the day, this is a novel way of understanding the patient's needs better, because on the one hand side you can say, I'm going to develop a drug that's going to cure rheumatoid arthritis, because we know 1% of the people have it, so there's a market need there. But at the end of the day, which aspect of rheumatoid arthritis, for example, has the highest unmet need, you often will only learn if you listen to the patient. So I think there has to be an element of genuine humbleness in the researchers that at the end of the day will benefit both the patients as a customer, as well as the business of biomedical researchers. And I think that's something that's being settled, and the measures are being implemented more and more so.
And Eva, from your point of view,
Yeah, I mean, it's such an it's such an interesting, multifaceted area, and I think that we struggle with it a lot. I think that traditionally, the community has tended to be rather dismissive of the input, has tended to be dismissive, period, of the input of, patients and technology users, patients in particular, and the academic community, just like the pharma community, share a real need to be able to be much more open to input and understanding what people's real problems are and really what their needs and desires are. I mean, often people are designing solutions for problems that the patients actually don't even perceive to be problems, which is an enormous waste of time and effort. And, in a contrary way, are not really paying any attention to the things that the patients themselves would identify as issues. And I mean, I've seen that, multiple times. I do a lot of work with a disease group that's, I think, really one of the best organized disease advocacy groups actually worldwide. And they have funded, on the back of money that the patients and the families have raised, pretty much every basic discovery, and it has completely revolutionized the understanding of DNA repair and all breast cancer, and I mean a whole bunch of other disorders that really are not even what this disease is. So it's been extraordinary scientifically. And a couple of years ago, and everyone sort of knows the litany of problems that this disease has. And several years ago, I was opening an annual conference for this, and I asked if I could actually do a survey of the patients and families. And interestingly, the patients and families identified that gastrointestinal problems were their number one issue. And there wasn't, and I then did a second survey, by the way, there wasn't a single expert physician, not one, zero, who thought that this disease had gastrointestinal problems. And this has been the focus of major funding and major studies since the 1920s. And because the other problems are so sort of overwhelming and scientifically interesting and not sort of quite as practical, it had never even surfaced as an issue. And I always thought that was a brilliant illustration of, these people doing one thing and this other community doing another, and them communicating a lot of things, but not about the essence of what the lived experience was.
do we need more of these feedback mechanisms?
I think so.
That are built into the process itself. So not to wait for a conference where this by chance comes up, but that you need regular feedback mechanisms to check, what is it we don't see? What is it we overlook? What are the problems that we have to deal with? Just as you were speaking about, the landowners and, what
Well, and also that there are real solutions in the community. I think that, the patient innovation program that's being run out of Portugal is an excellent example of really surfacing that it's not just a flow of samples or money or even information. It's really a flow also of innovative solutions to medical problems that would put, a $10 million hospital-based effort to shame. I mean, taking your child with cerebral palsy and taking some Velcro strips and strapping that kid to your legs and your feet so that they can walk down the street with you erect. There isn't a single doctor that I know or physical therapist who's come close to envisioning anything that brilliant. That's extraordinary, and it goes from something that in some senses simple but revolutionary to, really complicated, ways of getting people with cystic fibrosis to be able to clear their lungs using really extraordinary physics-based technologies. So I think we also undervalue the solutions resident within the community, and that's certainly true with medications. I mean, people use medications off-label all the time.
Or they don't use them.
Yeah, but the more interesting thing is that they use them off-label for
Yeah.
diseases that they have managed to actually really mitigate
That's right.
in ways that we are opaque to. So information sharing.
I think the moment has come to open up to you, the audience here. We have time for a couple of questions.
My question would be a twofold question. When I was listening to you, my question considers innovation and innovation that is also economically interesting. Like when I was listening to you, you were saying that in a way as a byproduct of your research, you are also inventing technology, if I may simplify it a little bit. When I was listening to you, you were saying in basically the innovation that could happen is if you invest as a biotech company in education and work with educational institutions, but maybe also that you need to be more humble listening to patients. But actually, from listening to you, I don't see really now where could be like really already products or things happening before the patenting stage, or something that could be shared. I mean, you were saying that the sharing in clinical trials is actually something that would be very innovative. So there is so many different sorts of innovations going on, and policies waiting for very fast commercialization of scientific research. I just wonder if you have here any clues on how those things might happen in a more managed way or in a more planned way, not just as ad hoc technological solutions. So maybe this is a kind of openness that could also be built in, like the openness for byproducts or the openness for collateral things that happen. Would that be something that could be induced into your thinking?
So innovation as an open process, Thomas.
I think there was another component to this. How can it be managed more effectively? I think it's also if you think about drug discovery, I think that the different potential partners should speak more closely together early in the drug discovery process. So basically, you have the academic scientists, you have technology providers, biotechnology companies, you have the pharma companies, and you have somebody to fund it that is either local or global venture capitalists or other capital that can be provided. So I think that there's a time to generate new structures early in the drug discovery process, to have them all united in a certain framework, striving towards a certain goal, namely accelerating drug development. And I think this is a new dimension. There are incubators who are basically tying 2 or 3 of these different partners together. There are certain partnerships where maybe 2 of these potential partners work together. But in my view, I think you basically need to integrate all of them in the early drug discovery process much more efficiently to save time, because time is really of essence. Otherwise, you have to do everything in a sequential way. If you can bring the different partners or potential partners together, find a common framework, incentivize all of them to work together to a new goal, namely a new drug candidate, then you can basically save time that you otherwise would need to do drug discovery, find money for translational research, have verification technologically, find money to build a company, find more money to build a company early stage, etc., etc. So I think, to me, integrated partnerships early on would be a major stepping stone to accelerate drug development.
You said would be, or
it is. It's
okay.
a thing that that evotec is actively participating in, and I see it happening. I would say starting in the US more, and then coming to Europe also.
Wolfgang, I can see many opportunities for setting up firms around what you do. What is your take on innovation in answer to this question?
Yeah, I guess, let's say having an innovation environment as we have it now in this specific field for archaeological research has a very high potential in the way how our research is performed in the future, but also how the research is performed at partners. Let's say companies which provide sensors that we integrate into large arrays, that we stuff with all the positioning systems and navigation systems so that we can operate them on large scale and high efficiency and high resolution. produces data amounts which are something these sensor providers have never been thinking about. And this is a point when this flows back into a completely other field. So these sensors, which are mainly developed for testing motorways or for testing rail tracks and so on, they could not process the data on a large amount. So they measured 1 hour and then they processed 1 day. Now with the feedback from archaeology, they can start to do new solutions so the machines can run on motorways, on rail tracks constantly, and there will be an online data analysis possible. And this is things which are strangely not directly related to archaeology, but they are invoked by archaeology.
Do we have another question from the audience? The question is, taking the example of schizophrenia, whether you have whether you are focusing only on the traditional school medical, as we say, the school medical ways of treating it, or whether you are widening the scope to admit non-traditional, even considered non-scientific approaches.
Well, I mean, I think that the simplest answer to that is that the whole concept of interdisciplinarity, which is so central, it's not the only thing in open innovation, but which is so central, would embrace many different approaches. And I think that we've learned consistently over time that many non-traditional approaches actually have very rigorous scientific explanations, and that incorporating them and learning and trying to understand them is very important. So I think most open innovation efforts in biomedical science are extremely open to non-traditional approaches and try to integrate them. And that ranges not just from non-traditional medications, but also to, you know, mind-body approaches, color theory, architectural influence on illness. I mean, it's pretty broad.
Yeah. It's a good answer. One more question, if I see a hand going up. Does not seem to be here. Last question, please.
My name is Günter Koch. As much as I understood, interdisciplinarity is the name of the game you are more or less all supporting. Observing institutions in science, like universities or science bodies, I could observe over the last decade that what is called economization, or what is called a structuring of these organizations following certain principles which came from economy and management sciences. By my experience, having managers in these positions of science organizations, you introduce in some way some linear thinking, if I may say so. And my question would be, do you not consider that introducing this type of management in science organizations or in research organizations is part of the problem that we are not achieving that interdisciplinary research?
Yeah, I am a good example for this because I studied archaeology and computer science and mathematics. And once you hand in a research project, it goes into review. If you have an archaeologist, he says it's too technical. If you have a computer scientist, he says it's not basic research in computer science. So it's a big problem. And I guess when these open innovation concepts actually should foster, that is planned from the state in Austria, the solution of the problem of interdisciplinary research and the funding of this interdisciplinary research has to be solved in a first instance.
Very good answer. So we are coming to the end. Maybe you still would like to, you just gave us a good piece of advice.
The best.
But maybe the other panelists would like to follow. what is it that you would want to advise here in Austria, what all those who are concerned about open science and open innovation should observe and, if possible, follow? Thomas.
I think the one aspect I'd like to reiterate what Eva was saying, that is start to asking the right question up front. Asking the right question is much more difficult than you sometimes think. It's been part of my personal experience. You start off in a direction, you're on a way, and then you have to halt at some point and say, what was the question I started off with? So I think it's really, it's an excellent point. So everybody, when you go somewhere, please ask yourself, what do I really want to have answered on my path?
I guess, and
you have more days, but not everyone
No,
will be able to listen to you
yeah,
tomorrow.
no.
I would love to. I would love to.
I mean, I think a summary of some of this, not all of it, is that, you know, this is a world in which there's just a massive and massively increasing rate of knowledge available and knowledge to incorporate into of a variety of endeavors, whatever they are. And it is a sort of change of basic principle and approach of institutions, of individuals, to really acknowledge that, you know, you can't master all of that, even in your own area, even with 3 degrees and whatever, that we have to develop, whether you call it open innovation or not, we have to just develop a different mindset about accessing other people, accessing information, and, you know, making ourselves less autonomous if we are going to work effectively. And so one is, I think, that effectiveness requires outreach, and it requires openness and willingness to receive, which is not really part of many of our cultures either, and that we need to integrate that. And the second is that we need to, and you said this very eloquently in your example, we really, and you just said it again, that we need to really understand about being purpose-driven. I mean, if you live in just a world where you're being stimulated every 2 seconds by interesting information and interesting questions, maintaining some focus on what the purpose of the endeavor is, I think, is increasingly hard. Everything looks interesting. And we need to understand how to discipline that, but not become so locked in that we don't see opportunities. That's a big challenge.
So we have gotten very rich advice here. When you leave this evening, take it with you and think also how you would explain the purpose that you consider to be important in 300 words. Let's thank our panelists, and I hand back to Stuart. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, Professor Helga Nowotny, what a fantastic and fascinating discussion this evening. And we'd also like to thank our other panelists, Professor Eva Guinan from Harvard Medical School. Thomas, Dr. Thomas, we'll make you a professor for this evening because you're among professors on the stage now. Thomas Hanke from Evotec, and Wolfgang Neubauer, Professor Wolfgang Neubauer. Back as a student tomorrow. So I don't think they have the academical viertel anymore tomorrow. So you have to be pünktlich and on time. That's true.
Point, yeah.
And I'd like to also thank, for the hard work that she's done, Claudia Linkner and her team at the Ludwig Boltzmann Gesellschaft. Thank you very much indeed, Claudia. And it's time for us to show our appreciation to you. You'd like to join us maybe for something to eat, something to drink, and maybe you can talk to one of our panelists or meet and greet the people from the Gesellschaft or indeed the Institute or indeed the Austrian Council or our guest tonight. So thank you very much indeed for coming, and have a good evening. Thank you.